Thank you very much for joining us today. The United Nations Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, or the UNGPs, have become the authoritative global standard on business and human rights. They clearly outline the minimum expectations that businesses should prevent and address the adverse human rights impacts. However, it has taken a long time for the business and human rights to gain traction in Asia. Even in the years after the adoption of the UNGPs, most stakeholders in Asia still conceptualize the responsibility of business towards people and planet very narrowly. It was in fact only in 2015-16, sort of towards the beginning of 2016, that Asia started a very, very robust implementation on business on UNGPs in the region. As a first step towards implementing the UNGPs, states have been adopting national action plans on business and human rights since 2013. As of today, 30 national action plans have been adopted globally. In Asia, following Thailand and Japan's footstep, Pakistan launched its SNAP in September 2021, and we have a representative joining us from Pakistan to take us through the journey that they have had. Moreover, India's National Action Plan development process is ongoing and towards the final stages. While Nepal has formally committed to developing a National Action Plan, and Bangladesh and Sri Lanka have been promoting the UNGPs and we're hoping to join their sub-regional peers in the SNAP journey. However, despite this headway, significant gaps remain. Business and human rights discourse still struggles to achieve tangible outcomes for rights holders, especially when it comes to the access to effective remedy. Examples of progress are scattered and insufficient. Also accepting the fact that Asia does have unique challenges. At the high-level opening plenary today, the speakers will outline current state of business and human rights discourse in South Asia. The discussion will highlight the key challenges as well as opportunities in driving better outcomes across the subregions, and also will elaborate the plans and aspirations to move the needle on business and human rights in the years to come. In short, in this session, we will hear where we are, what works, what isn't working, and most importantly, how can we push the business and human rights agenda in the region. And to take us through this journey, I would like to welcome the panelists for the session we have today with us. Mr. Ahmed Adam Abdullah, the Vice President, Human Rights Commission of Maldives. Maybe you want to say a hi because we have people joining us online. Ms. Bhavani Rana, Member Executive Board, Executive Committee, Board FNCCI. She's joining us virtually. If you can also give a spotlight at her. Mr. Inamullah Khan, Secretary, Ministry of Human Rights, Government of Pakistan, who's also joining us virtually. Can we also add him to the spotlight, please? Ms. Kalpana Akhtar, Founding Executive Director, Bangladesh Center for Worker Solidarity. Ms. Mohsina Yasmin, Executive Member at the Bangladesh Investment Development Authority. Mr. Ramchandra Dhakal, Joint Secretary, Ministry of Labor and Social Security, Government of Nepal. And we have with us joining online, Viraf Mehta, Partners in Change, who I see has already in the spotlight. Thank you very much for joining us today. As you all know, we are running a little bit behind the time, and we do have a couple of questions, but perhaps we would try to cut short. And if you could also keep your answers brief, I think we could maybe have some time in the end also for the question and answers as well. Actually, with that, I think I would like to really start with the first question. We do have representation from India, from Bangladesh, from Nepal, from Pakistan, and Maldives in this. So we're kind of covering at least a few countries in South Asia. And I think, given the title of the forum and the objectives that we have, I think it would be really interesting for us to know, what do you think are the country's key achievements and challenges in promoting business and human rights agenda in the past couple of years? You will have about, I know I initially said, take about 5 minutes, but maybe if you could sort of try to sum it up between 3 minutes, and then we will have the follow-up questions. And to do that, maybe perhaps I could invite Mr. Inamullah Khan, the Secretary, because Pakistan recently adopted the National Action Plan in 2021. And let's hear from him on what he thinks are the key achievements, but also in challenges once they do have the National Action Plan. Mr. Khan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Fareed. Am I audible?
Yes, you are. We can hear you very well.
Thank you. Very good morning to all of you. In fact, I was supposed to be part of this activity in person, but somehow due to official engagements, I wasn't able to. Thanks anyway. Basically, Pakistan embarked on this journey in 2019. Before I kind of enumerate, the mechanism or the processes involved in it, let me contextualize how we have done this. Basically, Pakistan being a federation, it has 4 provinces with the federal government. And most of these subjects related to human rights due diligence are devolved subjects to the provinces. So in terms of preparation and consultative process, that itself was quite challenging because you had to take 4 provinces on board along with certain autonomous regions also. So when we are talking in terms of Pakistan, you are say talking about something like 250 million population and trying to evolve broad consensus on various thematic areas, which kind of spread on over 8 broad thematic areas. So that itself was a huge challenge. And that consultation process took us almost 2 years. What we did during that process was we kind of went into every provincial headquarter and other industrial hubs of the country. And we engaged different chambers of trade and organizations, along with trade unions, CSOs, NGOs. And it was a fairly elaborate consultative process, and data and feedback was collected from all these stakeholders. And then after that data and the feedback was collated, then it was kind of again shared with all the stakeholders. And out of those, certain recommendations were born, which were again circulated into something like 40 odd ministries of the provincial and federal government. And feedback and input was taken from there also, because this, in terms of implementation, Harpreet, let me state that it's going to be a challenge in the sense that most of these actions, which we have kind of proposed, something like 69 administrative actions, will be taken by different actors and stakeholders. So we wanted to have a buy-in of the policy as such. So after that process was finalized, then we took it to the federal cabinet in August last year. There it was deliberated by the federal cabinet along with the recommendations of the line ministries and provincial governments. And by end of September 2021, we were able to get the approval of the federal cabinet. Thereafter, we went into the implementation phase. What we have done is that we have constituted a steering committee of all the stakeholders. So basically, it's not kind of a top-down approach. We have basically given this authority to the different stakeholders to kind of sensitize all the stakeholders involved and get it implemented. We have shared a work plan for 1 year that kind of enumerates different administrative and legislative actions which are ought to be taken over a period of 1 year. And we have got that work plan approved by the steering committee. And now we are in the process of forming subcommittees, and thereafter we will roll it out in terms of how to implement it. In terms of challenges, as I mentioned, Pakistan being culturally, ethnically, politically, and socially being a diverse country, that itself is a challenge. And then the industrial and commercial landscape which we have is quite staggered all across the country, and bringing entire informal sector within that proverbial tent itself would be a challenge. And what I foresee is most of the companies in Pakistan, particularly in urban areas, are involved in human rights due diligence regime. The challenge would be in the rural hinterland where a lot of informal activity takes place. So that would be a challenge in terms of bringing them in the net. In terms of how to improve safety standards, that will pose a challenge. In terms of, if I may move on to the second part as to what are the lessons learned, it's still nascent, we have just rolled it out. As I just mentioned, the staggered industrial and commercial landscape would be a challenge. Unregulated economy, gender-based discrimination, working conditions. So broadly, Pakistan also faces almost similar situations which rest of the South Asian countries do face, with varying degrees in terms of its intensity or in terms of its scale. So that's broadly what I would like to say. If there are any questions, I'll be obliged to respond. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Khan. And I think you really highlighted one of the key approaches that you undertook for your national action plan, to keep it really having that consultative process, not just with one stakeholders, but across the range of stakeholders, but also like really taking it to the provincial level. So not just kind of keeping it at the, at the city level. So I think that was really one of the key, I think that's also, could be one of the key learnings for the countries who've just started the process, like, Nepal, in terms of developing their national action plan. But, also one of the important things, I think, if I could take away from your remarks, is that smart mix, as we say in the business and human rights. But I'm saying this in the context of having this top-down approach where there is a strong commitment from the leadership, but also the bottom-up approaches that you've talked about. So thank you very much for those comments. I do realize that you would not be able to stay back for the entire session, but we have Mr. Abrar who's joining him today and would be available for any questions at the later stage. So thank you so much, Mr. Khan, for making the time today. And we do hope to see you in person, hopefully soon. Thank you. With that, if I could actually move on to Mr. Ramchandra Dhakal, because Nepal has just sort of started the process. So why don't you sort of take the floor and tell us a little bit more about what's happening in Nepal on business and human rights. So the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Harpreet. Actually, Nepal has started a journey to make a business and human rights action plan. It started from 2020 with an objective of focus on the business and human rights. The government integrated the 5th National Human Rights Action Plan 2020 to 25. And then last year, we have the Ministry of Labor, Employment and Social Security is the focal ministry for framing the National Action Plan of Business and Human Rights. For this, an interministerial drafting committee has been formed with the representative from the concerned ministry, FNCCI, and Joint Trade Union Coordination Committee. And actually, I headed the committee drafting and consultative committee, building on the assessment of the interactive activity reflecting the action plan. A dedicated action plan is being drafted in the participatory and consultative manner with all stakeholders, including FNCCI, corporate and business sector, NHRIS, CSO, experts, media, human rights defenders, and the concerned interlocutors. Then so far we have carried out 7 provinces level consultation and are supposed to continue with different segments of the society. To be specified, we are planning to conduct the focus group discussion with lawyers, judiciary, trade union, and human rights defender, and the human rights communities from the federal to local government. So it is going smartly, I think, and a little bit challenges in this journey. First, when we started this journey, the understanding is different. Private sector understanding is different, government sector understanding is different, and the trade union sector understanding is different. Now we are coming together, we are going to participatory framing and drafting process and consultation process. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. And I do hear you when you're saying, there are different levels of understanding, and there's a different level of also awareness about business and human rights and the concept per se, but also sort of, what does it really mean for the businesses? And in fact, because, we're already, we're talking about Nepal here. Ms. Rana, if I could, ask you sort of, maybe a follow-up questions in here also, because we've seen that the FNCCI has taken many initiatives in the past year and has done a lot of work to promote the implementation of UN guiding principles in Nepal. What do you think are the triggers, and how have these initiatives triggered down among the suppliers in Nepal? If you could maybe highlight a little bit both on that. The floor is yours, Ms. Rana.
Thank you. First of all, let me say that I'm not an executive member. I'm the immediate past president of FNCCI. Saying this, I would like to share my views and just before me, the Joint Secretary, Mr. Dhakal, he mentioned that how FNCCI and government is working together to eradicate this human rights. And also, I think in Nepal, business community is very significantly contributing to the fundamental principle and the rights of the work. We have worked together with the workers' organizations also for negotiating and finalizing the labor law contribution based on social security law, which employers are also supporting effective implementation also. So Federation of Nepalese Chamber of Commerce, which is the umbrella organization of the private sector in Nepal, even being a past president of this federation, we are pushing human rights issue as an integral part of the business also. Talking about this national plan of action, which are very practical and very powerful vehicles for the states effectively implement and US guiding principle, and also to create an enable environment and particularly smaller companies to fulfill their responsibility to respect the human rights and all. So actually SMEs are the backbone of the economic in our region, especially even in Nepal. So SMEs, they have different kind of challenges and resources also, and also like possibilities when it comes to the implementation of the UN guiding principles and the recommendation. So what we feel that we need to maybe really focus on the challenges and limitation of the SMEs also. So we work very closely with the government also for all these things. So employees organization, which also have a very key role as a multiplier among the business community in terms of awareness raising and capacity building work. So we are very closely working with even IOE, which provide guidance on the UN guiding principle for business enterprises also. So I really feel that collective actions are needed from all the relevant stakeholders. So as FNCCI, we want to address the root cause of the human rights challenges in the region. So I think we need to work closely with different stakeholders.
I think we've lost her. We're still learning this hybrid modality, but maybe if we can actually, Kalpana, Ms. Bhavani was also sort of highlighting the workers' rights and the way that they have engaged with the workers in the region. And I think that's something that Mr. Khan also said in the beginning in terms of, making sure that the processes are consultative, but, not just with one sector of the society, but really, really sort of across the range of actors. I would want to give you the floor actually with two questions, because I'm going to, try to sort of also, bring the, try to sort of close it on time. A lot has been happening in the country, in Bangladesh particularly. So, I would really like to hear from you what you feel, both bringing in the context from Bangladesh, but also bringing in a perspective from the workers' rights as well. So if you could maybe, just tell us what's happening in Bangladesh, where we are there any learnings from the region that we can take along?
Sure.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Harpreet. Am I audible? Am I? Okay, great.
Okay,
Yeah, I'll be trying to louder. Okay, thanks. Yeah, so yeah, it's true that, there is a lot happening in Bangladesh, but when we talk about that, what happening regarding the workers, it's really very minimum happening. When we talk about worker rights, we are still struggling with many issues in terms of our labor law, in terms of our, labor law reform, in terms of union registration, in terms of gender inclusion. But when we are saying all this, we have some advantage as well. In 2015, where in international UNBHR in Switzerland, I think I met with our Human Rights Commissioner regarding started discussion about national action plan in here, Bangladesh. So we really had a hope that, after that conference, we might be start discussion in here, but things has changed. We couldn't start that, and COVID has pushed back a lot. But gladly, the consultation just started, I think, with some of the UN agencies and a bit of civil society who started discussion on this. So discussion is still in the air. It is no doubt to say I wanted to take advantage of, having our principal secretary in here. Through him, I wanted to urge that our government should be speed up on this topic. So we are kind of like behind if we compare other country in South Asia. So while I'm saying this, I wanted to say other thing as well, like just having business and human rights principle in your country but not enforcing that, that doesn't make any sense. So when we have action plan, we need to also remember that we are enforcing that in our country in South Asia. And our country definitely can learn, from our neighbors that, as Surya says, that when you had a meeting in Delhi, then there is a progress started. And the Pakistan has, has adopted that as well. And Maldives has, sorry, if not Maldives, Nepal has done that too. So our government certainly can do that when they are putting a lot of effort on economic development. And I think it is a time for giving some, sight and some time to human rights development as well. And no doubt, we definitely want the right holder, the workers' inclusion with it, trade union inclusion and civil society inclusion when the discussion happens. Thanks.
Thanks, Kalpana. I am hearing what you're saying is, Bangladesh needs to catch up with what's happening in the other countries in the sub-region, but also sort of more broadly Asia. And we have with us Dr. Kamal Ahmed, who's a full-time member at the National Human Rights Commission. The process actually hasn't stopped. I think, it has been sort of led under his leadership. And in fact, the National Human Rights Commission does have a business and human rights thematic committee, and they have been bringing together different stakeholders. Perhaps, we should look at how we can also integrate and maybe create more awareness about some of the processes that are underway. But I also, in the end, you also said that development, the countries where we have a national action plan, the development is just not enough. We need also the implementation, and we need to make sure that, there is a monitoring and evaluation framework so far per se in terms of the national action plan that also needs to be looked at. Ms. Jasmine, I'm going to turn on to you now because, Bangladesh is at a really, really interesting stage. We heard from our inaugural address speakers this morning in terms of, what's happening in Bangladesh, but perhaps I could maybe hand it over to you and would like to hear from you where you think Bangladesh is. Is it ready to have a national action plan? What's happening in the development? What's really happening in its business and human rights space, and what we can hope to take it from here.
Thank you, Dr. Kaur. I think what is happening in Bangladesh, everybody has told that. But what I'm working as in BIDA as Foreign Investment Promotion Wing, and we give some licenses to our business projects. So whenever we get the registration, we put some conditions, like they have to take the safety measures of Factory Acts, they have to take permission from the environment clearance they have to take. And most importantly, we give some conditions to incorporate some facilities like daycare center, maternity leaves, low cost and safe housing facilities for the low paid female workers near or around the establishment, equal pays and allowance for male and female workers in their organization, low price canteen for workers, enact effective rules of conduct to enable working atmosphere among the male and female workers. So we have many laws. We are putting many human rights requirements in our project registration. But things what happen whenever they get the registrations, we don't have the monitoring or compliance. It is not very strong to comply, whether they are complying or not. So recently, you may heard that our Prime Minister's office has made a committee and give us the BIDA a responsibility to further investigate the business and entities, whether they are complying with the laws and rules we have now. So, but about the national action plan, I think we should many laws, many acts, many regulations, and we are doing such thing in very discreet manner. So if we have a national action plan like our peer countries, I think it will be very effective for us to have a monitoring system so that the human rights in the businesses entities are they are following the rules and regulations or human rights should be very, we can strongly monitored, and then it will be get a result for a inclusive human rights condition for the businesses. I think that's all from my.
Thank you so much. Yeah, we could have all of these, we could have all of these requirements, but, we do need this. What I'm hearing again and again is, we also need these strong monitoring systems as well. In fact, one of the key advantages or one of the key elements that I see with the National Action Plan is that it does provides a policy coherence, bringing in both the vertical as well as the horizontal policy coherence. And I think that's really important, particularly if you do want to really push the business and human rights agenda in the region or in a country itself. I see that Ms. Rana has joined us, but maybe, Mr. Ahmed has been like a really, really patient listener to us. But maybe if I could just, hand over the mic to you and hand the floor to you. We've seen that Maldives is really, really keen on sort of taking this journey and, kind of really coming equal to its peers, neighboring countries as well. We were in Maldives recently, and we've had these trainings with the National Human Rights Commission, sort of really trying to understand business and human rights. And we've had, I think, a lot of interest from the government as well as NHRC, but also other stakeholders. So, Mr. Adham, why don't I hand over the floor to you and hear from you what's happening in Maldives?
Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Human Rights Commission of the Maldives, I would like to thank UNDP, UN Working Group on Business and Human Rights, and the International Labour Organization for inviting me to speak at the third UN South Asia Forum on Business and Human Rights. It is my pleasure to participate in this high-level plenary on BHR, focusing on our direction ahead. This forum will give us the opportunity to learn from colleagues in the region on recent trends in BHR, its discourse, human rights due diligence, intersectionality in human rights issues, including practical applications. Indeed, many labor-related rights, such as the right to safe work environment and freedom of association, and non-labor rights, such as the right to an adequate standard of living and right to physical and mental health, are affected due to actions, or rather inactions, by business enterprises in the Maldives. Recently, especially due to the COVID-19 global pandemic, we have seen employees terminated or transferred without notice. We have seen staff abandoned in rural islands, in resort construction islands, without food, water, or salary. Mainly migrant workers, and the Maldives Police Service will had to relocate them to temporary shelters. I will skip the statistics in the interest of time. But to answer the question, what are the major achievements over the past couple of years? The most significant achievement, in my opinion, is the commitment by the Attorney General of the Maldives to develop a national action plan on business and human rights. And its commitment to include pertinent instruments in our legislative agenda to facilitate compliance by businesses to the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. Based on this commitment, I am hoping that the Maldives will have its NAP enacted in the next 4 years or so. I will touch on the challenges in my next question. But secondly, in addition to the systemic improvements in monitoring, investigating, and reporting BHR violations, the Human Rights Commission of the Maldives has launched an ambitious advocacy campaign as a significant entry point to benchmark businesses in the Maldives in order to incentivize and maneuver their practices in line with the UN guiding principles. And it's an significant improvement that we had Dr. Harpreet with us a couple of weeks ago, training 30-odd staff of the Human Rights Commission on business and human rights. Thank you so much. It was a very well facilitated session. It is indeed a priority for the Human Rights Commission of the Maldives to uphold the 3 pillars: respect, protect, and remedy under the UN guiding principles. It is a strategic objective of our strategic plan of 2020 to 2025 to strengthen engagement with the private sector in the domain of business and human rights, with a view to increase human rights compliance in their operations. The desired outcome is to improve human rights compliance to business of private and public enterprises, including better protection for workers and rights related to employee well-being, discrimination, and harassment. So for the future, we are targeting for a 20% increase in compliance to human rights by businesses in the Maldives by 2025. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. It was indeed a pleasure to be there. And I think, these trainings, the capacity, and, these trainings and the awareness raising events, I think as we said, as we also heard in the beginning, I think the progress is unequal in the region. Different countries are at different states. So it's really important that we keep organizing these trainings, but also awareness raising sessions as well. And what I hear here is the commitment to develop a national action plan for Maldives. So, we have somebody to kind of hold on to account when we don't see the progress. So Kalpana, now if something happens in Maldives, where to look up to. We also have another really, really patient listener, in fact, Viraf Mehta, who's joining us online today. Viraf also gets the credit of actually, really starting the business and human rights movement in Asia, not just in India, when he organized the first Asia consultation on business and human rights way back in 2009. That was also sort of my beginning, or my first, my first time with the business and human rights and trying to understand more. Viraf, thanks for being patient here. But tell us now, what progress has India made in the last few years? What is still lacking? And what do you think should be the priorities for the government, for all the stakeholders for the next 2-3 years? And perhaps if you could maybe sort of take about 4 to 5 minutes, and then we would open the floor here for questions as well. Thanks, Viraf. The floor is yours. Viraf, you will have to unmute yourself, please.
Okay, thanks very much, Harpreet. And I've been not just patiently listening, but listening very carefully to everything's been said at this forum and the side events leading to it. I congratulate all the organizers for putting us together, and very happy to be here with all of you. My sense in answering your couple of questions, Harpreet, is that at the one level, it's been a tremendous decade and a half. I think that not just from the Indian perspective, but having been involved with other South Asian countries for a while now, it's clear that in a wider sense, the responsible business conduct, to use a phrase that's been mentioned earlier this morning as well by other speakers, is there to stay. The question really is the depth of understanding of the role that human rights plays in a sustainable achievement of responsible business conduct, as indeed in the case of the SDGs. When we had the MDGs from 2000, that period, we hadn't articulated very clearly the underlying role of human rights in achieving these millennium and now sustainable development goals. In much the same way, the Indian government, for example, way back in 2010 and 11, articulated a set of 9 principles covering environment, governance, labor rights, lobbying, bribery, corruption, ethics, transparency, and human rights. At the same time as the entire business and human rights mechanisms, or the framework of protect, respect, remedy, was becoming the UNGPs. It is, in fact, to my mind, because of conversations with business primarily and other stakeholders, that we have an option here in terms of the positioning of how we take forward things. So when we talk about the SDGs, we very clearly talk about all the goals and all their targets and where we are as nations in South Asia, how close to achieving them. We don't actually talk about human rights when we're talking about SDGs. And the flaw is that of understanding and capacity is the criticality of a human rights-based approach to achieve those SDG targets. In the very same way, we could have had an option in India in 2011 to create a national guideline for business and human rights, but we did not. We created a national guideline, ultimately, of which human rights was one core cross-cutting pillar. Because in the language of taking this not just to the top, the biggest and the brightest, our top 100 industries or 500 or 1,000 companies in the country, but taking this to where it matters in the supply chain, the tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 suppliers who are all small, medium enterprise. I think over time, over, well, maybe the last 2 decades since India opened up in 1991, have recognized that whether they export, whether their aspirations are to grow and become parts of global or domestic value chains, supply to government as a government push for sustainable public procurement, etc., that whatever you call this agenda, sustainability, corporate responsibility, responsible business conduct, they've understood this. There's enough supporting a conversation with business and in depth, even a small factory, to talk about the relationship between business success and business sustainability and the imperatives of social environment in a language and in an ethos that they've been accustomed to for decades. Now comes business and human rights. And it is never, ever an intent on anybody's part to try and dilute anything to do with labor rights or human rights, but to transport it more effectively to businesses in a paradigm, in a mechanism that they can commit to, integrate, measure, communicate, all the things that we actually now call human rights due diligence. But previously were experienced by businesses in South Asia as at best EIA and SIA and those terminologies. My sense is that in moving forward, I am completely optimistic that the global demands, the business case that has been stated early this morning by ILO and so many other speakers, the imperatives of consumers, and the very real migration, climate change, human rights challenges that we are confronted with will impel business to a more sustainable journey. The debate here today is how much of that will be successful if human rights is not adequately embedded into that process or ignored, indeed, or seen by many governments yet and other stakeholders, including business, as something new, sometimes something a little alien, sometimes something that they have not fully understood and is seeking to replace older traditional mechanisms. May I end on a type of example? For a century and more, all of us in South Asia, certainly speaking for India, we've had financial reporting, annual reports, and decades of oversight by a host of agencies, making sure that the basic disclosures by business on financial aspects were above board and there were penalties attached to that, etc. It was only in 2012-13 financial year that India came up through these guidelines and brought about mandatory disclosure, including on human rights. So it took a century for this to happen. And we were just in the process of replacing one disclosure framework with another, including human rights. My final ending sense is that as a purist, as a complete buy-in person to the human rights and business agenda, my advice would always be that we integrate it into a wider conversation that includes the UN SDGs and responsible business conduct. Those leadership companies who are able to translate the complexities of the language and the depth of human rights institutions protecting human rights will take time. And it is this careful engineering of how we position issues of child labor, issues of bonded labor, issues to do with migration, issues to do with gender, issues to do with the living wage, issues to do with safety as human rights issue, and are able to show the added value of a human rights-based approach to things that they are already accustomed to do, rather than something brand new that arose in 2010, because that would not be completely accurate. So I think that the success in the days ahead, and as South Asian nations who share very, very similar thematic issues, very similar challenges as far as the SDGs are concerned, and have signed on to those. We need to agree on a way to be able to reach the lowest common denominator. If I'm talking to a top 100 companies in India, listed companies in the stock exchange, there will be one way of speaking with them. But if my attention is to be focused on 90% of small, medium enterprise or micro, small, medium enterprise, then surely I have to have a different way of approaching the issue. And I believe that it's the latter that requires the focus now rather than the top 100. And in order to do so, we need a consensus on how we are positioning a human rights-based approach to things that are already familiar, already have shown success, rather than something brand new that would require enormous capacity and ramp up. I do not think, for example, that a small factory making garments is going to understand every 30 or 40 of every child's right, every single labor right, and become human rights experts. But they are going to have to respect human rights as we have demonstrated them. But whether this is going to be positioned as a parallel movement or something integrated is a matter of discussion, and that it is on. So I do see that we already have a framework for RBC, responsible business conduct, and the matter of India having an NAP to articulate one of those cross-cutting principles is I think also a question of how it integrates our most recent understanding of how we brought the environment and human rights together in terms of a right to a clean and healthy environment, rather than environment and human rights. It's actually, human rights and environment. And we're seeing enormous changes in the way that we conceptualize key pillars of the responsible and sustainability discourse, because at the end of set national targets as South Asian countries for the SDGs. And business have been made familiar with those over the last couple of decades. And I do believe that human rights is now a way of aligning their approaches to these older processes to actually achieve that sustainable, the first prefix. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Viraf. We also heard the need to align, need to align different agendas and break the silos of these different human rights movements and different agendas. We also heard that quite a lot during the side sessions, but also at the country sessions as well. And, I hear also when you're saying that we don't really, in some ways we have proven the business case for businesses to respect human rights. My personal belief, though, is, even if there was no business case, would we stop respecting human rights? But I think for those who do need a business case to promote business and human rights, we do have that. We have that established, all the lot more than ever before. I see we only have about now 6 minutes left, but if we can maybe extend by 5 minutes, I know I'd be standing between you and the lunch, but maybe if you could sort of extend by 5 minutes, and perhaps would be good to take some questions. I see some questions coming here online, but if you have any questions from the floor, perhaps. I see 2 hands at the back. Can somebody hand over the mic, please? And if you could be please brief and ask your questions or make your comment very, very briefly, so then we can bring in more people. Thank you. Okay, while we are fixing the mic, I'm also reading.
Hello.
Okay, go.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for giving us the opportunity, and thank you also the speakers. And my name is Kokon Suitan Mumu, and I am an indigenous rights activist, and I'm from Bangladesh. And my specific questions to ma'am representing Bangladesh is if Bangladesh going to establish the national action plan on business and human rights, should they integrate the indigenous people's right? Because indigenous peoples are the one of the major group of SDGs, as also the left behind communities in Bangladesh. Only there are 1.8% indigenous peoples are living here, but they are living in very miserable conditions. Their per capita income is very less than the common people. as well as the indigenous peoples are living in the areas where the business and human rights is the main concern. And indigenous peoples living in the areas and business and human rights, the main.
Sorry, if you can be really brief. I
Yes.
think we've,
The
I'm
main
really sorry, but if I hear your question is I think also, ma'am, because I'm just reading questions here online as well. I think some of the questions are coming up. Where does Bangladesh stand in its commitment to develop a national action plan? But I think if I hear your question correctly, is when Bangladesh commits and start to develop a national action plan, where would the indigenous people would feature in it, and how do you plan to address
Yes.
it? Is that your question?
Yes, ma'am. Yes,
Thank you.
I want to mention that Bangladesh should acknowledge the prior and informed consent to make this treaty with the indigenous people strong, and acknowledge the ILO Convention 169 as well as the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of the Indigenous Peoples 2007, because this highly emphasizes the prior and informed consent of the indigenous
Sure.
peoples with the government as well as the business enterprises.
Thank you so
very
much. I'm really
Yes.
sorry. I'm going to have to cut it
Thank
down,
you,
but I
ma'am.
think we do hear that. But perhaps we can take another question from the floor here, or if you would like to answer immediately, Ms. Jasmine. There is a question for Bangladesh.
Yes, thank you for the question. I think whenever, if our government is going to draft this kind of document, your rights, the rights of the indigenous people should be there, will be there, because government is very proactive about these things. Nobody will left behind. It is an inclusive government. Government is trying to do everything inclusive of everybody in the every citizen of the country. So I think the indigenous people will never be left behind in any documents like this. So rest assured, government will take care of it.
Garbit, can I take like 30 seconds?
Yes, please go.
Thanks for keep this alive, brother. Thanks for bring this up. As an activist, we'll fight together for this inclusion. No worries. Thanks.
Thanks, Kalpana. Do we have any? Okay, maybe right here. We'll just take one question from here, and then we're going to take one question online. Can we pass the mic to this gentleman here, please? No, here in the front. We have had one from the back. Let's take one from the front side also.
Thank you very much. Very good presentation. My question goes to the Pakistan representative. As you have
Mr.
rightly,
Ibrar, this is
Yes.
for you.
as you have extensively mentioned about the process and the operations for the implementation so far, I just wanted to know, because we have just started a process of drafting the separate plan of action on business and human rights, and we're very much concerned about the implementation, because we do have a lot of policies, actions already in place in regard to human rights in generic. So just to kind of integrate the means and measures in advance to make the implementation more robust, wanted to know from you that if there is already an operation plan that talks about partnership strategy, talks about communication and outreach strategy, and more importantly, the integrated approach to like bring all together for the effective implementation of plan of action. Thank you very much.
Sure. Thanks. Mr. Ibrar, did you hear the question correctly, or I'm
Yes, I heard the question.
You only have a minute to respond.
Okay, so the answer is very simple. As Mr. Inamullah Khan already mentioned, that for the effective implementation of NAP, PHR and the Pakistani context is that we have to engage all the stakeholders, including business entrepreneurs, the provincial governments. Because of the provincial autonomy, they have all the powers and the control over the labor departments and other spheres of businesses. So what we did that we are effectively implementing our national action plan through the steering committee, which has the representation from every stakeholder, including business entrepreneurs, chamber of commerces, and the provincial departments who are responsible for the implementation of the business and human rights. So this is the core strategy, to engage all these stakeholders and bring them on board and have a collaborative and coordinated effort.
Great. Thank you. And thank you for keeping the time. And if I could just move on to some of these questions online. In fact, Ms. Rana, there's a question on business practices in Nepal. particularly in this case on child rights. And I'm not going to read the entire question, but I'm sure you can read the entire, you can read the question here. But I think the question here kind of refers mostly in terms of, how can businesses respect child rights? And this is particularly in the context of, toys here. The question here is in the context of toys, but I think if you could, maybe if you could sort of expand a little bit more in terms of, hear from you, how could businesses respect child rights in Nepal, particularly if you have any examples on that. Thank you. I think I asked Ms. Rana online. Okay, we do have
Yes.
we have two representatives from Nepal, but maybe if you can start, Ms. Rana, with you, and then I'll hand it over to Mr. Dhakal here.
I just want to share that in November 2019, Nepal hosted the Asian Regional Conference on Eradicating Forced Labor and Human Trafficking and Child Labor also. So it was a very important meeting for stepping up engagement in the fight against child and forced labor. I think we need to follow up this kind of work and ensure that we keep the momentum also. And I think the Global Child Labor Conference in Durban in May will be quite important to strengthen this action. So FNCCI, in fact, we are working together with within the employers also, and even with the workers and government also, to eradicate and like there should be no child labor in the business and even in the industry. So I think Nepal is working in a many ways to protect and respect human rights, especially the child rights also. So laws and policies are also in place, and it's very important provision needed to protect human rights as stipulated in the constitutions and other related laws also. So in fact, we have a National Human Rights Commission, which was established and working which is working very effectively also. So I think provision related to this child labor, forced labor, gender discrimination, right to form trade union and collective bargaining are incorporated in the child laws. I mean, in the labor laws. So labor laws have also provision related occupational safety, health, social security, and also the child labor. So this is how we work together with the government and with the other our members within the federation.
Thank you, Mr. Dhakal. You only have 30 seconds to add onto that. I'm sorry.
Thank you. I
really
follow Ms.
difficult
Rana.
here.
Already mentioned all the things. We have make a action plan for abolition to the child labor, and we have a separate ministry, and all the law are reformed, including to this against child labor and this action plan. NAP, we mentioned the major, one of the 5 major area, and one of the area is the woman and child right is the one of the area. So policy, law, and institutionally, we are making everything and going to abolish. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Also, just one comment I think that I would like to read from here, which it says in the context of Bangladesh, but it really says when you do start developing the National Action Plan, we have to make sure that it's rooted in the UN guiding principles on business and human rights. So perhaps this is also good for Maldives to hear. Maybe if I can give 30 seconds to each of you for your closing remarks, and maybe we can start with you, Mr. Radha. 30 seconds each.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'll make it brief. So in line with the government's commitment, the NAP should strike a balance between, I mean, as the principal secretary was saying, a balance between understanding human rights and understanding businesses. So it is a very fundamental part of NAP and NAP implementation. It is fundamentally the government will need to set clear expectations of business enterprises and exercise adequate oversight. I mean, as in Principle 5 of the UN guiding principles. And the government will need to seek effective, sustainable, reliable, trustworthy systems for victims to seek remedy. And I feel Maldives will face significant challenges on this front. Just make it brief. We are looking forward to have multi-stakeholder consultations within Maldives in order to push the BHR agenda. I mean, in short. Lastly, I hope that the 4th UN South Asia Forum on Business and Human Rights to be held in the Maldives.
Who
So
wouldn't
we are
want to be
looking
there?
to welcome you in the
Okay, your
Maldives.
30
Thank you.
seconds are up. Thank you so much, Kalpana.
Thank you. Mine is like we are lag behind. So we have like NHRC chairman in this room. So we should start now and it should be speed up. We should not be, lag behind from our neighbors while they have their action plan and we don't have. Thank
We
you.
do have the government, NHRC, businesses, and the workers' rights and the rights holders here. Maybe we could just maybe do a workshop here and start developing.
I'm eager too. I'm eager too.
Thanks.
And inclusion needed. The inclusion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dakal. 30 seconds.
Thank you. I would like to thank you. Extend my sincere thanks to the organizer for inviting us to this 3rd UN Asia Forum on Business and Human Rights. On behalf of the government of Nepal and my delegations, we feel privileged to be part of this forum. And we share our experience on business and human rights. I believe that the outcome of the discussion will be instrumental for us further sharper and plan of action that we are planning to impress, induce and implement.
I think there's a competition now between Nepal and Maldives. We'll have to say whether we get to travel to Nepal or Maldives next year. So give us good reasons to come to your country.
We have 1 year more time, so I hope we'll finish and complete the action plan.
I know Professor Surya often says it's a marathon.
Yeah.
So it's just the beginning here. Okay. Okay, I'm going to move to Ms. Yasmin here, and then I know that we have 3 speakers online as well for their final concluding remarks, but maybe Mr. Yasmin, if we can hand it over to you.
Thank you for organizing this seminar, as this forum in Bangladesh, and inviting me to this panel. And I have learned many things from this forum. And I think whenever our government is going to draft this kind of national action plan, I maybe give some inputs what I learned from the best practices of our peer countries. So thank you very much.
Thank you. In fact, we found sort of champions on business and human rights sitting here in this very room. We have Dr. Kamal also, and we have you here. So, we do have 2 champions, and I hope you can convince the government to start working and committing to a national action plan. Viraf, I'm going to give it to you. 30 seconds is all you're going to have.
Okay, so the first one is 10 seconds. Let's follow up these issues, some of them, till the next forum. So we have a platform and a way to go into these in more depth and report back at the next forum. Second part, even if NAPs are delayed, let's be clear, one of the messages of the UNGP as a business responsibility to respect human rights is even if the state is unwilling or unable to come up with an NAP. So the business responsibility is absolutely clear. I think our challenge in South Asia will be pillar 3, creating effective remedy for victims of adverse impacts or violations of human rights by business. Look forward to further discussions and then reporting back to everybody on progress on the 4th.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Great, thanks. Well, India could also be one of the other contenders for the next South Asia Forum. We do have 3 national action plans sort of, now lining up here. But thanks, Viraf, for really bringing up this issue about, access to effective remedy. I don't think it's a challenge just in South Asia, but I think even if, the 10th year's anniversary report of the working group also states how we do need to sort of do a lot more work on access to remedy, the 3rd pillar globally, not just in South Asia or in Asia. So thank you for that. Ms. Rana, your 30 seconds starts now. I think you'll have to unmute yourself, or if the technical facilitators can unmute her.
I think we are heading towards the right direction, and then I see a lot of development in the recent years also. These developments are very important, and to respect and to protect the human rights in our region. But I still feel that more over compliances and effective enforcement of laws and regulation is necessary for the protection of human rights. Business organizations should understand all laws and have to create appropriate means and mechanism to comply with all the applicants' laws. So moreover, commitment of enterprises management with policy statement is instrumental. So I feel that we see very dynamic development with regard to business and human rights in our region. So our region needs to actively engage in these kind of development. The laggards of today's will be the losers for tomorrow. So I would like to end by saying this. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Mr. Khan, over to you. For your final concluding remarks, I think you will have to unmute yourself.
Thank you. Well, I have 3 points. One is Pakistan is fortunate that we already published our map, and then as a challenging area, we are stepping in. And I hope with the political commitment and enhanced coordination, we will overcome the challenges. And for the South Asia Forum, I think that we must learn peer learning. We should use the peer learning for the rest of the development of the National Action Plan for the rest of the countries. And we shall learn and exchange our experiences for the implementation of National Action Plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Khan. In fact, thank you for pointing out this, particularly about the peer learning opportunities. And I do remember, when Pakistan committed to develop a national action plan, peer learning exchange with the Thailand, particularly because they've already had a national action plan, was really, really useful. And I think that really did help, sort of also the Pakistan delegation to sort of understand how Thailand went around sort of, developing the national action plan. But with that, I think the session has come to an end, but I really would like to thank all the panelists here also joining online as well. Thank you so much for being patient. And I'm sorry we were a little delayed in the beginning, but because I don't want to now be delayed for the next session, I really would want to close. So thank you, everyone. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. The lunch